The fallacies of modern Indian history. I now request Professor Suraj Basu, Director, School of Social Sciences, to kindly give his address on this topic, Indian freedom struggle and Dalit intelligentsia.
Distinguished Chief Guest, Dr. Chandan Mitra ji, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Rabindra Kumar, my beloved colleague and mentor, Professor Kapil Kumar, and my dear colleagues. I will not take much time, and I hope you would allow me to speak for 25 minutes. So the topic that I have selected for presentation is India's struggle for freedom and Dalit intelligentsia. And the title of today's seminar, The Different Streams and the One Goal, was selected keeping in view that may not be all are the serious students or researchers of history, but in our school we have studied the freedom movement, national movement, and we have grown up with a kind of narrative of freedom movement without knowing that there are many voices which we could not hear. So I would like to draw your attention to that part of our freedom struggle which is generally not brought to the notice of the common people who are not engaged in research and freedom struggle. So the attention to it, I will begin with the 1857 movement, and there is an interesting article written by Badrinaran Tiwari. The title of the paper is Dalits and Memories of 1857. As I was talking to a colleague of mine, that when we talk of 1857, we all know about Mangal Pandey, and you have seen the film also, but very few have heard the name of Matadin Bhangi. So I will just read from the paper he had written. The 1857 War of Independence, which the elites claim was started by Mangal Pandey, was actually inspired by Matadin Bhangi. And the narrative is as follows, I quote, there was a factory in Barakpur, which is in present West Bengal, where cartridges were manufactured. Many of the workers of this factory belonged to the untouchable communities. One day, one of the workers felt thirsty. He asked a soldier for a mug of water. That soldier was Mangal Pandey, a Brahmin, and naturally he refused him water because the worker was an untouchable. This was very humiliating for the worker, and he retaliated to the Brahmin soldier by saying, I will quote, बड़ा आया है ब्राह्मण का बेटा, जिन करतूस का तुम उपयोग करत हो, उन पर गई और सुअर की चर्बी लगल जाती है, जिन्हें तुम आपन दातुन से तोड़कर बंदूक में भरत हो, वो समय तुम्हार जाति और धर्म कहाँ जावत, धिक्कर तुम्हारे इस ब्राह्मण बातों का. You claim to be a highly respectable Brahmin, but the cartridges which you bite with your teeth and insert in your guns are all rubbed with the fat of cows and pigs. What happens to your caste and religion then? Curse on your Brahmanism, unquote. Now, this particular character in the entire narrative of 1857 is hardly referred in our text, but historically it is present. It is one of them, and there are many women heroes, which also from the text which is written by one of the Dalit scholar, we find the name of Jhalkari Bai, Avanti Bai, Panna Dhai, Uda Devi, Mahaviri Devi. These names are all associated with the 1857 revolt, which particularly Western UP, Eastern UP, and Bengal witnessed this. But when we read the history of 1857, we hardly remember any one of them because this never got the place in our text as they deserve. There is another way of looking at it. This is one part of the story of ignoring the voyages who were participants in the freedom movement. There is another way of looking at it, which is in the recent writings of history, some of the Dalit activists and Dalit intellectuals. Particularly, I will refer here to important works, one by Aloysius and other by Broj Ranjan Moni. I will quote what Aloysius says. What came to be looked upon as the nationalist class was nothing but the disparate and traditionally dominant caste and communities gathered together in their interest to preserve their traditional dominance on the one hand over the lower caste masses and to enlarge their area of dominance in the new political society on the other. It's a totally different way of looking at the freedom struggle and ignoring the contribution, rather denigrating the contributions made by thousands of people, which include both elites as well as the masses. Then another scholar, as I wrote, said, Broj Ranjan Moni, he writes, I quote, the ideological moorings of the mainstream Hindu nationalism led by forces like the Indian National Congress, despite eloquent and effective claims to the contrary, was not different from the cultural nationalism of the RSS. The term Hindu became a euphemism for the upper caste who crushed any dissenting voice from the lower ranks as casteist, divisive, and loyalist, all in the name of social cohesion and anti-colonialism, unquote. So these are two well-researched books wherefrom we get totally a different interpretation of the entire nationalist movement. Now comes the question where we stand. To get an answer to this, I would like to draw your attention to the writings of Ambedkar. He is an intellectual which many of us do not know because very few of us read him, but his immense contribution in the form of his works published in 17, 18 volumes, we must try to read. I would refer here from his work, which is titled, What Congress and Gandhi Have Done to the Untouchables. It was written in 1945. Listen carefully. In taking the side of the Congress as an organization fighting for freedom, the foreigner does not stop to make a distinction between the freedom of a country and the freedom of the people in the country. The freedom of a country and the freedom of the people in the country. In not stopping to make this distinction, the foreigner, it must be said, far from understanding the matter, is allowing himself to be misled, if not deceived. For words such as society, nation, and country are just amorphous, if not ambiguous terms. There is no gainsaying that nation within quote, though one word means many classes. Philosophically, it may be possible to consider a nation as a unit, but sociologically, it cannot but be regarded as consisting of many classes, and the freedom of the nation, if it is to be a reality, must vouch the freedom of the different classes comprised in it, particularly those who are treated as the servile classes. Consequently, it is foolish to take solace in the fact that because the Congress is fighting for the freedom of India, it is therefore fighting for the freedom of the people of India and of the lowest of the low. The question whether the Congress is fighting for freedom had very little importance as compared to the question for whose freedom is the Congress fighting. This is a pertinent and necessary inquiry, and it would be wrong for any lover of freedom to support the Congress without pursuing the matter and finding out what the truth is, unquote. So I have put before you these writings and ideas of Ambedkar in order to understand that what he means by freedom. And here lies the most important issue that needs your attention. When some of the scholars, particularly the Dalit intelligentsia whom I have referred, taking the clue for Ambedkar, they try to negate the entire India's freedom movement. I personally feel they fail to appreciate the sacrifices of number of people simply because they belong to the upper caste. Because the people who sacrificed their life, whether it is in the revolt of 1857, whether it is the later mass movement starting from 1920-21 non-cooperation movement till the Quit India movement which has been referred, or those who joined the Indian National Army under the leadership of Subhash Chandra Bose, definitely it is not the caste consideration. It is not the ulterior motive of capturing power that inspired them to sacrifice their life. I was reading a book on 1930 Chattagam Armory uprising, where the people, the Master the Surya Sen, Ganesh Ghosh, the 6 people who were associated, they were hardly, except the Surya Sen who was 30 years old, all were of the school-going age 17, 18. Is it because of the caste consideration that they came forward and raised the banner of revolt, and that also the armed struggle against the British? To my mind, it is not the correct reading of the entire struggle that continued under the mainstream nationalist movement. And that's why there is the importance to understand the various streams, the various concerns, and the various interests which came together to fight against the British imperialism. And here I would again draw your attention to some of the important aspects, because it is not possible to read the entire things. I would try to draw your attention to some of the important aspects which generally we overlook when we read the writings of Ambedkar. Again, I would try to draw your attention to that. Ambedkar was of the view that any form of liberation movement without annihilation of caste was not in the interest of the Dalits. I quote, "In my opinion, only when the Hindu society becomes a casteless society that it can hope to have strength enough to defend itself. Without such internal strength, Swaraj for Hindus may turn out to be only a step towards slavery. A person from his childhood who faced this discrimination at every stage of life, he can speak, he can write from his heart for the thousands of masses who are unnoticed and who are experiences this life. And this cannot be mixed up with the mainstream narratives." Again, I will, in another context, he writes, "We feel that nobody can remove our grievances as long as we can, as well as we can. And we cannot remove them unless we get the political power in our hands. No share of this political power can evidently come to us so long as the British government remains as it is. It is only in a Swaraj constitution that we stand any chance of getting the political power in our hands, without which we cannot bring salvation to our people. We know that political power is passing from the British into the hands of those who wield such tremendous economic, social, and religious sway over our existence. We are willing that it may happen, though the idea of Swaraj recalls to the mind of many the tyrannies, oppressions, and injustices practiced upon us in the past. This is from Ambedkar, volume 2, unquote. Now the question comes, you may have also read in many journalistic writing and research writings where it has been projected like that Ambedkar and many of the Dalit leaders who were fighting for the separate electorate, who were fighting for the Dalits when the mainstream nationalist movement was fighting for the political liberation, so they were construed, they were joining hands with the British and against the mainstream nationalist movement. This is also not fully correct, because we have to understand the sufferings of a sizable section of the society which, because of certain regions, did not get prominence in the agenda of political battle that was under the banner of the Congress was taking place. And particularly when Gandhi realized this and started this untouchability movement, temple anti movement, he started that Harijan Patrika in place of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. He coined the term Harijan and Girijan, but he failed to win the confidence of a sizable section of the Dalit intelligentsia in this direction. It is not Ambedkar alone. There are others, like one great example is from Punjab, where the Adha movement was there and the leader was Mangu Ram. And Mangu Ram, he took part in the Gadar movement, which was started in America. And when he came back in 1925 in Punjab, he belonged to the Dalit community, and he saw there is not much change towards the Dalits by the dominant caste. And then he took up the leadership of the movement, and all along he fought for their rights. So it is not the issue of the caste which was predominant in his mind. Then he did not join the Gadar movement, which is part of our revolutionary movement started by Lala Hardayal. And similarly, we find there are among the Dalits leaders like Jagjivan Ram, who was studying in Vidyasagar College in Calcutta in 1930, and being inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, he joined the civil disobedience movement after coming back to Bihar, and all along his life, he was associated with the Indian National Congress. There was a tallest leader from Tamil Nadu. Very few knows his name. His name was M.C. Raja. He was the first Dalit representative in the Central Imperial Legislative Council, which was in Shimla. And all along his life, he was either in the legislative assembly, state legislative assembly, or the legislative council. And till 1938, when the temple entry movement started in Chennai, and he was opposed to Rajagopalachari and wrote against Gandhi, he was all along with the Indian national movement. So it is not the one voyage, even within the Dalits. There are the different leaders, there are the different voyages within the Dalit. So projecting it as an unified voyage and denigrating the Indian nationalist movement as a movement of the upper caste, it is a partial way of looking at it, and we fail to understand, on the other hand, who try to describe the Indian national movement vis-a-vis the movement of the Dalits as a separatist trend within the Indian nationalist movement. That is also not correct way of looking at the movement. Why I am saying so? I will give another reference from the writing of Ambedkar, which he gave at his presidential address in the All India Depressed Class Congress in 1930. Before the British, you were in the loathsome condition due to your untouchability. Has the British government done anything to remove your untouchability? Before the British, you could not draw water from the village well. Has the British government secured you the right to the well? Before the British, you were denied entry into the police force. Does the British government admit you in the force? Before the British, you were not allowed to serve in the military. Is that career now open to you, gentlemen? To none of this question, you can give an affirmative answer. Those who have held so much power over the country for such a long time must have done some good, but there is certainly no fundamental improvement in your position, unquote. Now you see 1930 is very historically important year. That is the time the civil disobedience movement started. That was also the time when the Simon Commission came and there was the bargain for the sharing of power, and Ambedkar was speaking as a president in the Depressed Classes Association where he is raising this question. And there are a number of such references. So when we bracket Ambedkar as an agent of the British imperial authority, as a historian to my mind, we are not doing the justice reading the events, reading the facts of that period of the time of history. I will just take 2 more minutes. As actually 1942 came in the presentation of Dr. Chandan Mitra, so I would like to end with a conference which was an international conference in 1942, what Ambedkar said there, I quote, "The British had declared war against Hitler. Mr. Gandhi had declared war against the British. The British have an empire, so have the Hindus. For is not Hinduism a form of imperialism, and are not the untouchables a subject race, owing their allegiance and their servitude to their Hindu masters? What does Mr. Gandhi propose to do after he gets his victory over the British? Does he propose to use the freedom he hopes to get to make the untouchables free? Or will he allow the freedom he gets to endow the Hindus with more power than they possess to hold the untouchables as their bondsmen? Will Mr. Gandhi and the Hindus establish a new order, or will they be content with rehabilitation of the traditional Hindu India with its caste, its untouchability, with its denial of liberty, equality, and fraternity," unquote. Now the question comes, in spite of these divergent views and the clarity in understanding that what freedom Ambedkar, representing the voice of majority of the Dalits, was looking for, it is the freedom from oppression, basically the social and economic. Whereas the national movement, the prime focus was the freedom, the liberation from political control. But there was a convergence of ideas. There is the maturity in the leadership. Otherwise, in spite of such writings of Ambedkar and his strong views, Ambedkar would not have been accommodated in the Constituent Assembly and was given the responsibility to draft the Indian Constitution, and he is aptly remembered in post-independent India as the father of modern Indian Constitution. So when we read history, we should not distort the facts. We should try to understand the minds of the people and not to denigrate and take a partisan view of the incidents that happen. And that's why when we remember, when we try to commemorate the freedom struggle, we should really understand the true meaning of the freedom and for whose freedom the people sacrificed their life. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your collective information on the freedom struggle. Before we open the